Mike Thompson wiped sweat from his brow, loading packages into his rusty van. A man in a baseball cap approached. "Mind if I ride along? I'm new here." Mike smiled. "Sure, hop in. I'm Mike." The man introduced himself as Dave, but Mike didn't know he was Daniel Carter, CEO of Quick Drop Couriers. Daniel had gone undercover to see his employees' struggles firsthand. As they drove off, neither knew their lives were about to change forever. Daniel's assumptions were about to shatter, and Mike's sacrifices would finally be seen. Mike's alarm buzzed at 4:30 a.m. He tiptoed past his kids' room, careful not to wake them. His wife, Sarah, was already at her part-time diner job. He grabbed a slice of toast and headed to his van. The check engine light glared, but Mike ignored it. He had 120 deliveries today. As he drove to the warehouse, Mike thought about Emily's school trip deposit and Jake's soccer fees. "One day at a time," he muttered, steeling himself for another grueling day. Daniel Carter sat in his penthouse, staring at an anonymous email. "You have no idea what we go through. If you care, come see for yourself." The words haunted him. He'd built Quick Drop Couriers from scratch, but lately he felt disconnected from his employees. "I need to see the truth," Daniel told his assistant. "Arrange for me to go undercover. I'll shadow a driver tomorrow." By 6 a.m., Daniel was at the warehouse, disguised as Dave Johnson, ready to see the world through his employees' eyes. Mike was surprised when his manager introduced him to Dave, the new hire. "You'll be shadowing Mike today," the manager said. Mike shook Dave's hand. "Welcome to the team. Ready to hit the road?" Daniel nodded, hiding his nerves. "Yeah, let's do this." As they loaded the van, Daniel noticed Mike's efficiency. He had a system for everything, from organizing packages to mapping routes. "You've been doing this a while, huh?" Daniel asked. Mike smiled. 5 years. You learn a few tricks along the way." Their first stop was a small suburban house. Mike grabbed a package and rang the doorbell twice. An elderly woman answered. "Mike, always so punctual." Mike handed her the package. "Just doing my job, Mrs. Jenkins." She handed him a homemade cookie. "For your kindness." Back in the van, Daniel asked, "Do you always go the extra mile like that?" Mike shrugged. "It's just the right thing to do. These people rely on us, you know?" As they drove to the next stop, Mike's phone buzzed. A text from Sarah. "Did you get paid yet? Emily's school trip deposit is due tomorrow." Mike sighed and typed back, "Not yet. I'll figure something out." Daniel noticed the worry on Mike's face. "Everything okay?" Mike forced a smile. "Yeah, just family stuff." But Daniel could tell there was more to the story. He wondered how many other employees were struggling like Mike. As they continued their route, Daniel couldn't stop thinking about Mike's text. He'd always assumed his employees were fairly compensated, but now he wasn't so sure. "Do you like working here?" Daniel asked cautiously. Mike hesitated. "It's a job. It pays the bills. Most of them, anyway." Daniel felt a pang of guilt. He'd built a billion-dollar company, but the people who made it possible were struggling to get by. He vowed to make things right. But first, he needed to see the full picture. At their next stop, Mike noticed a stranded driver with a flat tire. Without hesitation, he pulled over. "Need some help?" Mike asked. The driver looked relieved. "Yes, please. I don't know how to change a tire." Mike grabbed his tools and got to work. Daniel watched, amazed by Mike's selflessness. "You're always helping people," Daniel remarked. Mike shrugged. "It's just what you do. We're all in this together, right?" By noon, they stopped at a convenience store for lunch. Mike bought a cheap sandwich and a bottle of water. Daniel offered to pay, but Mike refused. "I've got it," he said. As they ate, Daniel noticed Mike glancing at a family enjoying a meal at a nearby cafe. "You ever eat there?" Daniel asked. Mike shook his head. "Too expensive. Maybe someday." Daniel felt another pang of guilt. He'd never thought about how his employees couldn't afford the luxuries he took for granted. As they drove, Mike opened up about his family. "Sarah works part-time at a diner, but it's not enough. Emily wants to go on a school trip, and Jake needs new soccer cleats. Daniel listened intently. That's tough. Do you ever get help from the company? Mike shook his head. Not really. We're just numbers to them. Daniel's heart sank. He realized how disconnected he'd been from the people who kept his company running. You're more than a number, Mike, Daniel said quietly. But Mike didn't hear him over the engine's roar. Their next delivery was to a wealthy neighborhood. A man in a suit answered the door. Finally, I've been waiting all morning. Mike handed him the package. Sorry for the delay, sir. The man grumbled, but handed Mike a $20 bill. Here, for your trouble. Mike's eyes widened. Thank you, sir. Back in the van, Daniel asked, Do you get tips often? Mike smiled. Not really. Most people just slam the door. But when they're kind, it makes my day. Daniel realized how small gestures could mean so much to someone like Mike. As they continued their route, Daniel noticed how overworked Mike was. How many deliveries do you make in a day? Around 120, Mike replied. But sometimes it's more if someone calls in sick. Daniel frowned. That's a lot. Do you get breaks? Mike laughed. Breaks? If I take too long, I get complaints. It's a broken system, but what can I do? Daniel felt a surge of anger. He'd designed this system, thinking it was efficient. Now he saw how it was crushing the very people who made it work. At their next stop, Mike noticed a little girl crying on her porch. He approached her gently. Hey, what's wrong? I lost my doll, she sobbed. Mike searched the yard and found the doll under a bush. Here you go. The girl hugged him. Thank you, mister. Daniel watched, touched by Mike's kindness. You're good with kids. Mike smiled. I've got two of my own. I'd do anything to make them happy. Daniel realized how much Mike's small acts of kindness meant to the people he served. As they drove, Mike shared a painful memory. Last year, I couldn't afford Christmas gifts for my kids. Sarah and I skipped meals to buy them something small. Daniel's heart ached. That's terrible. Didn't the company offer any support? Mike shook his head. They gave us a $10 gift card. It felt like a slap in the face. Daniel felt a wave of shame. He'd approved those gift cards, thinking they were generous. Now he saw how insulting they were to someone like Mike. I'm sorry, Daniel said quietly. Their next delivery was to a struggling single mom. She handed Mike a handwritten note. Thank you for always being so kind. Mike read the note and smiled. It's my pleasure. Back in the van, Daniel asked, Do you get notes like that often? Mike nodded. Sometimes. It's what keeps me going. Daniel realized how much Mike's work meant to the community. He wasn't just a delivery driver. He was a lifeline for many. You're making a difference, Mike, Daniel said. Mike shrugged. I'm just doing my job. As they drove, Mike pointed to a homeless man on the street. I used to be like him. Lost my job. Couldn't pay rent. This job saved me. Daniel was stunned. I had no idea. Mike sighed. Most people don't. They just see the uniform, not the person inside. Daniel felt a lump in his throat. He'd never thought about the stories behind his employees. Thank you for sharing that, Mike, Daniel said. Mike nodded. Sometimes it helps to talk about it. Daniel vowed to make changes so no employee would ever feel invisible again. As they took a break, Daniel decided to open up. I grew up poor too. My mom worked 3 jobs to support us. Mike looked surprised. Really? I wouldn't have guessed. Daniel nodded. I've been lucky, but I've forgotten where I came from. Talking to you has reminded me. Mike smiled. It's easy to forget when you're at the top. Daniel felt a renewed sense of purpose. I'm going to make things right. Mike, I promise. Mike looked skeptical, but nodded. I hope you do. As they approached their next stop, the van sputtered and died. Mike groaned. Not again. Daniel helped him push the van to the side of the road. What now? Mike sighed. I'll call for a tow, but I'll lose half a day's pay. Daniel felt a surge of frustration. That's not fair. You shouldn't be punished for something out of your control. Mike shrugged. It's the rules. Daniel clenched his fists. Rules need to change. While waiting for the tow truck, Daniel decided to reveal his identity. Mike, there's something I need to tell you. Mike looked confused. What is it? Daniel took a deep breath. I'm not Dave. I'm Daniel Carter, the CEO of Quick Drop Couriers. Mike's eyes widened. You're the boss? Daniel nodded. I went undercover to see what life is really like for our drivers, and you've shown me more than I ever expected. Mike stared at him, unsure whether to feel angry or hopeful. Mike finally spoke. So what happens now? Daniel looked him in the eye. I'm going to make things right, starting with you. Mike shook his head. It's not just about me. It's about all of us. Daniel nodded. You're right. I'll fix this for everyone. Mike smiled faintly. I hope you mean that. Daniel extended his hand. I promise. Mike hesitated, then shook it. I'll hold you to that. As the tow truck arrived, Daniel made a call to his assistant. Cancel my meetings for the day. We have work to do. Mike watched, still processing everything. What are you going to do? Daniel smiled. First, I'm getting you a new van. Then, we're fixing this company. Mike's eyes filled with hope. You really mean it? Daniel nodded. I've seen the truth, Mike, and I won't ignore it anymore. For the first time in years, Mike felt like someone truly cared. Daniel returned to the office with a fire in his heart. He called an emergency meeting with the board. We've been blind, he declared. Our employees are struggling, and it's our fault. The board members exchanged uneasy glances. What do you propose? One asked. Daniel slammed his hands on the table. Higher wages, better benefits, and a support fund for employees in need. No more excuses. The room fell silent. For the first time, they saw the passion in their CEO's eyes. Daniel invited Mike to speak at the next company meeting. Tell them your story, he urged. Mike hesitated, but agreed. Standing before hundreds of employees, he shared his struggles and sacrifices. We're not just drivers, Mike said. We're fathers, mothers, and dreamers. We deserve better. The room erupted in applause. Daniel watched, proud of the man who had opened his eyes. Change starts today, Daniel announced. And it starts with us. News of the changes spread quickly. Employees cheered as Daniel announced higher wages and new benefits. Mike's phone buzzed with messages from his coworkers. Thank you for speaking up, one read. Sarah hugged him tightly. I'm so proud of you. Mike smiled, feeling a weight lift off his shoulders. For the first time in years, he felt hopeful about the future. True to his word, Daniel gifted Mike a brand new van. This is just the beginning, he said. Mike ran his hand over the shiny exterior. I don't know what to say. Daniel smiled. You don't have to say anything. Just keep being the amazing person you are. As Mike drove off in his new van, he felt a sense of pride he hadn't felt in years. The community noticed the changes too. Customers thanked Mike for his hard work, and some even left generous tips. You've always been there for us, one customer said. Now it's our turn to be there for you. Mike felt a warmth in his heart. He realized that kindness, no matter how small, could change lives. That Christmas, Mike's family celebrated like never before. Emily got her school trip, and Jake got new soccer cleats. As they gathered around the tree, Mike felt tears in his eyes. This is the best gift of all, he said. Sarah hugged him. We're so proud of you. For the first time in years, Mike felt like he was enough. Daniel sat in his office, reflecting on the past few months. He'd learned more from Mike than any business school could teach him. Leadership isn't about power, he wrote in his journal. It's about empathy, courage, and the willingness to change. He vowed to never forget the lessons Mike had taught him. Mike's story inspired others to speak up. Employees shared their struggles, and the company listened. Daniel created a program to support employees in need, funded by his own salary. This is just the beginning, he promised. Mike visited Daniel's office one last time. Thank you for everything, he said. Daniel shook his hand. No, thank you, Mike. You changed this company, and me, for the better. As Mike walked out, he felt a sense of pride and purpose. He knew his story was just beginning. Daniel began visiting other branches, shadowing employees like he had with Mike. Each story he heard deepened his resolve to make lasting changes. Every employee has a story, he told his team, and it's our job to listen. The company culture shifted, becoming more compassionate and inclusive. Employees felt valued for the first time in years. Daniel knew this was just the beginning of a long journey. Mike's story spread beyond the company. News outlets picked it up, and soon people everywhere were inspired by his courage. "It's not about me," Mike told reporters. "It's about all the hardworking people who deserve to be seen and heard." His words resonated with millions, sparking a movement for fair wages and better working conditions across industries. With the company's support, Mike enrolled in night classes to finish his degree. "I want to show my kids that it's never too late to chase your dreams," he said. Sarah and the kids cheered him on, proud of his determination. Daniel even offered to mentor him. "You've got what it takes to lead," he said. Mike smiled, feeling like the future was finally within reach. A year later, Quick Drop Couriers was unrecognizable. Employee satisfaction was at an all-time high, and turnover rates had plummeted. Daniel stood before his team, tears in his eyes. "This is what happens when we put people first." The room erupted in applause. Mike stood among them, a symbol of hope and change. Daniel addressed the audience in a viral video. "Success isn't measured by profits, but by the lives we touch. Let's never forget the people who make our world go round." Mike watched from home, surrounded by his family. "He's right," he said. "We're all in this together." As the video ended, Mike felt a sense of pride. His story had changed lives, and it was just the beginning.